Before the automobile culture, the urban working class and lower petty bourgeoisie had no access to the country's remaining wilderness areas. Nonetheless, many of the specific policies promoted by the conservationists were progressive. The establishment of national parks, forests, and wildlife refuges, limits on tree cutting to make forests self-regenerating, the prohibition on dumping toxic wastes in lakes and rivers. But I want to focus on the ideological outlook of the conservationist movement. Love of nature became an important component of American nationalist ideology in this period. The remaining wilderness areas were viewed as the country's most precious natural heritage. While Europe had its historical castles, its magnificent palaces and art collections, America had its majestic mountains, its primeval forests, its crystal clear lakes. It was no coincidence that the most politically powerful representatives of the conservationists, Teddy Roosevelt, was also the main representative of the nascent American imperialism. While he was president, Roosevelt made a pilgrimage to John Muir's cabin in the Sierras to pay homage to the high priest of conservationism. The same social and ideological milieu which gave rise to conservationist movements also established the Boy Scouts and Campfire Girls. These were originally organizations of class-privileged youth which combined nationalist ideology with outdoorsmanship. Being able to rough it in the wild was regarded as the mark of red-blooded America. A teenage son of a businessman or professional who spent the summer backpacking in the Adirondacks or Sierras was seen as having an enabling experience inaccessible to the son of an Irish or Italian worker living in the urban slums. In the U.S., class and ethnic privileges always go together. The American bourgeoisie was then overwhelmingly Anglo-Saxon, or more generally North European Protestant. The industrial working class was predominantly Irish, Italian, East European, traditionally Catholic, and heavily immigrant. The conservationist movement, by its very nature, was imbued with a nativist outlook. A large majority of its supporters were disdainful toward ethnic Catholics and regarded blacks and Asians as Untermenschen, subhumans. The administration of Teddy Roosevelt, the conservationist president, negotiated a so-called General's Agreement with Japan to prohibit further immigrants from that country. More generally, bourgeois conservationists saw themselves as morally superior to the vulgar masses, especially the immigrant communities, who were supposedly indifferent to preserving the culture's natural heritage. At the extreme, conservationism took on a quasi-religious character. Thus, John Muir writes, "Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wilderness is a necessity, and that mountain parks and reservations are useful not only as fountains of timber and irrigating rivers, but as fountains of life. Awakening from the stupefying effects of the vice over industry and the deadly apathy of luxury, they are trying as best they can to mix and enrich their own little ongoings with those of nature. Some are washing off sins and cobweb cares of the devil spinning in the all-day storms on mountains." Quoted by David Pepper, The Roots of Modern Environmentalism, 1982. Go stand in a mountain storm in the Sierras, and the only thing you will be washed away will be you. Doubtless, to the consternation of his latter-day followers, many of whom glorify Native American Indian culture, Muir was hardly progressive on that question. In his book Yosemite, 1912, Muir waxed lyrical about how successful U.S. military expeditions forced the Indians, denounced by Muir for their murdering, plundering style, into reservations, some peacefully, others by burning their villages and stores of food. And when Basque sheep herders first entered the eastern Sierras, Muir denounced them for despoiling the pristine state of nature. Here we have the central tenet of green radicalism, that nature in its pristine state must be preserved, predations of human civilization. Between the 1920s and the 1950s, conservationists organizations consisted in the main part of patrician mountaineers, as leftist historian Kirkpatrick Sale aptly described them. They represented a minor current in American bourgeois politics. The occasional conflicts between the Sierra Club and lumber companies, or between Audubon Society and real estate developers, were not the stuff of front-page news or broad public interest. The emergence of the environmental movement as a major player in American bourgeois politics was a product of the political developments of the 1960s and 1970s. The majority of young leftist radicals in the 1960s, white and black, considered that the white workers benefited from U.S. imperialist exploitation internationally, and this accounted for the prevalence of racist and chauvinist attitudes among them. The foremost theoretical exponent of Maoism at the U.S. at the time, Paul Sweezy, maintained that the working class in the advanced capitalist countries had, in its large majority, become a labor aristocracy. Hence, the relatively high standard of living in the U.S. was regarded as a fundamentally bad thing. It has been as directly responsible for the impoverishment of what is now called the Third World, and as the root cause of racism and support for imperialist militarism. At the time of the 1991 Persian Gulf War, Greenpeace, for example, stated, "Ecologically, the war in the Persian Gulf is a consequence of a fundamentally destructive way of life centered on our addiction to oil." Our meaning the American people as a whole. This way of looking at the world originated in the late 60s when neo-Malthusianism converged with certain currents of New Left radicalism. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, a journal called Ramparts served as an interface between left-wing of the liberal university-based intelligentsia and what was called the movement, Maoists, anarchoid types, revolutionary black nationalists. The September 1969 issue, which also carried 3 statements from exiled Black Panther leader Eldridge Cleaver, contained a piece titled Eco-Catastrophe by Paul Ehrlich, a professor of biology at Stanford. Here's Ehrlich's message. Western society is in the process of completing the rape and murder of the planet for economic gain, and sadly, most of the rest of the world is eager for the opportunity to emulate our behavior. But the underdeveloped peoples will be denied that opportunity. The days of plunder are drawing inexorably to a close.